Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second installment of our microlearning series for NICU professionals. My name is Diana Marrero, and I am a family support specialist here at Hand to Hold. This three-part series was created to help equip NICU professionals like yourself with the tools you need to support the families in your care with empathy, resilience, and confidence. Each installment of this series is worth one continuing education credit for NICU nurses. We'll share a link to the survey at the end of each presentation. For those new to Hand to Hold, we are a national nonprofit 501c that is dedicated to providing early intervention, mental health support before, during, and after a NICU stay, ensuring that all NICU families thrive. Support is provided in English and Spanish at no cost to families. Today, we are excited to share this first installment in the series, Delivering Hope Through Words, the Power of Effective Communication in the NICU with Mia Malcolm. I am excited to introduce our speaker, Mia Malcolm. Mia is a NICU family advocate, researcher, and NICU mama. She has a deep passion for health equity across all spaces, including infant and maternal health outcomes. Mia believes that health equity, belonging, diversity, and inclusion are imperative to prosperity of forward movement across industry. In Mia's presentation today, Delivering Hope Through Words, the Power of Effective Communication in the NICU, Mia will discuss communication strategies to use with NICU families and reflect on how to infuse hope and humanity into medical practices. Without further ado, I introduce to you the fabulous Mia Malcolm.
Thank you so much. Let me share my slides. All right. Okay, so first I want to say hello and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for taking time to listen to this NICU Mama today. I am a person that wears many hats, like you heard in the intro, but today I want to talk to you all from my favorite perspective, which is as Gavin's mom, a NICU parent, about the importance of communication with us NICU families. So before I get started, I always want to take a second to do a land acknowledgement because I think that it's really important to acknowledge the indigenous people as the original stewards of the land that we are on. So for me, I live in St. Louis. That means acknowledging the Illini, the Cahokia, the Osage, Mississippian, Miami, and Sioux people. I like to recognize the indigenous people as a way of expressing gratitude for the sacrifices that they made that allow us to do the things that we do, where we want to do them, and how we want to do them. But I also do it as a way of acknowledging the genocide that they experienced and the continuous harm that they endure on these lands. So now we will go ahead and get started. We have a three-pronged agenda. I think you heard about it a little bit. First, I hope that we can unpack some of the language that is used in our areas in the NICU, and then think through the impact of storytelling, right? So the stories that we tell, the things that we say about families and our patients, right, our tiny humans, and I call all babies tiny humans. So just thinking about that, and then last, I want us to like really reflect on how we can maybe do things differently to not just humanize our families, but humanize ourselves to people. So, excuse me. Like I mentioned before, I'm going to talk about language. I love storytelling. I think it's the easiest way to get points across. So, we're going to talk about storytelling. I'm going to do a lot of storytelling. But again, I just want us to think through together how the stories that we tell, how the language that we use can either impact families in a positive way, right, and deliver hope, or it can impact people in a negative way and, malign or dispossess them. So I want to think about that and think about effective communication, because we recognize that that is the cornerstone of family-centered care. And if we're not practicing family-centered care, we have to really think about what we're actually doing, right, in our medical spaces. So one of many stories. So this is my son, Gavin, or G. I'll call him one of the two throughout all of this. And he was, and according to my mother, still is a micro preemie. He was born at 24 weeks, 16 years ago, and we spent 268 days in the NICU. So his journey, his story, my story is what brought me into the work that I do in advocacy and EDIB and healthcare, mainly again in the research space and facilitating conversations with medical students or professionals across the country. So today, using my experience of Gavin's journey, I'm going to talk to you all about the words that we use and how they impacted me. And I think how they kind of impact a lot of our NICU families. So that's what we're going to do today. So up first, we're going to talk about language. And this word failure is the first word up. I wonder how many of you all remember the first time you called a patient a failure. I remember the first time that someone told me that G was a failure. I journaled every single day. While we were in the NICU, I have like 15 journals. I could actually grab one right now, full of just like all the things that happened, the conversations, the medicine changes, all the things, right? So when I say that I remember when it happened, I remember the first time. It was on a Wednesday. He was 5 weeks old, not really quite 5 weeks. He was 29 weeks and 3 days. So not exactly 5 weeks, but he was 5 weeks old. And the team had made a plan. They wanted to try to extubate him because he had been doing well, I guess. And G decided that their plan was not his business. So when they tried to extubate him, he coded immediately. He was like, no, thank you. I did not sign off on this. And he coded. And so, yeah, very scary moment. I felt like I was just like, it was the most insane thing. But he coded and they got him stable, and his attending turned around and he looked at me and he goes, well, he failed that. And for the next 3 weeks on rounds, I listened to how G had failed. I got to relive that moment from so many different angles and perspectives, and no one ever asked me about mine. And I sat there the whole time and I had watched the whole thing. And so over 9 months, I listened to endless stories about how G had failed either on this medication, or how he was failing to thrive, or how he failed this intervention. And going back to that moment, like at that particular moment, I just remember thinking, like, he's 5 weeks old. Like, he's been around for 5 weeks, and I'm confused about how he is failing something that's been around since like 400 BC, right? Because if this stuff isn't working, like, how is that his fault? And the other thing that I really remember holding, and I still really hold to this day, is that if he was a failure, it was because I had failed him. I failed to carry him. I failed to keep him safe. And now look at what I caused. So every time someone called G a failure or implied that he had failed or was a failure, I knew that I was the worst mom in the world. So I offer that failure is a really hard word. It's a heavy word for me, for Gavin's mom to hear, even 16 years later. I oftentimes reflect on how my initial failure is affecting him. Words matter, and failure is a hard word. Um, Okay, so for the sake of this story around misbehaving, I'm gonna call the nurse Kathy because that was not her name, and so we're just gonna go with Kathy. So let's imagine me sitting in G's room and he is having like a day. It's like one of those days like for the books, right? Like um if you want to think about a kid who was having Brady episodes, like on this day, G was Tom Brady. Like he was the MVP of Brady's. He was Super Bowl level Brady's. Like if there was a Brady to be had, he was going to have it. No one was going to out Brady him. Like he was just doing that. And it was that day. So on this eventful day, I'm sitting in his room and I'm just like, having all the feelings and the stuff because he's having all his feelings and stuff. And Kathy walks in the room and she goes, "Man, he is really misbehaving today, huh?" And, again, reflecting, right? Because words are important and words have meanings. And I'm like, misbehaving? Really? Um, so he was failing to conduct himself in a way that was acceptable to others. He was behaving badly. That felt really tough for me because I don't think that he was having multiple Brady episodes because he wanted to give her or anybody else a hard time. Like, I don't know that he woke up that morning and was like, I can't wait to get under Miss Kathy's skin. I'm going to just really shut the unit down with these Bradys today, right? Like, I just don't think that that was the inner dialogue that he was having because I don't know that he was capable of that type of inner dialogue. So misbehaving just, you know, it was complicated because I don't know that he was choosing to have medical complications. I think that he's just sick, right? He wasn't feeling well. Or maybe he was trying to figure out how to do things that he typically would not be doing had I not failed him initially, right? By keeping him where he was supposed to be. So, you know, again, the language, the words, right? So if you think and you reflect how many times you've taken care of a baby or and that baby is having multiple events or episodes of some sort, right? Whether it's Brady's, apneas, colds, if they're having a lot of reflux and throwing up, whatever the thing is, and you have heard someone say, or you said yourself that, man, this baby is really misbehaving or being bad. And it's one thing to say it like to your coworkers and your colleagues and like amongst, the medical people, but then you turn around and you say it to that parent, right? To that scared, tired, brokenhearted, angry parent that their baby is misbehaving. Just wonder if there's a better word or a better way to describe what's happening in that moment by like actually talking about what's happening in that moment and not putting the onus again on the sick baby for being sick and like not having a great day. So next up, right, 3 out of 4, is my least favorite word to hear in the NICU or really anywhere, especially when it is attached to families. And that is difficult because I often would ask people, what is a difficult family? Like, what are the characteristics of a difficult family? Like, what does that mean? And in my previous role, when I was working inside the hospital, I walked around the unit, I walked around the NICU one day, and I just asked people, different people in various roles, all the different roles, what makes a family difficult? Like, what is a difficult family? And some of the answers that I got was the ones that don't show up, the ones that are always here, when they don't trust us or they ask too many questions or they're not asking enough questions and they seem disengaged. Um, the ones that don't try to build rapport with the staff or if they're non-compliant, when they question every single thing that we do and they're not listening or they're just like always writing down everything they say, everything that we say. So I think what I got from that was like, in order for me to not be difficult, not be good, right? But not be a difficult family, I need to show up just enough, right? I have to show up because we all know that not showing up is not acceptable. But I have to show up just enough. And, I don't know what that number is, but just enough because I don't want to show up too much because that's annoying and I don't want to be annoying. Um, and then I also need to blindly trust strangers because obviously there's nowhere in my learning or teaching or coming up where I learned like this idea of stranger danger. And then there's no historical context of mistrust for certain communities. And, generational or familial or personal trauma is not a factor. So have to trust total strangers completely, got to show up just enough. I have to know the magic number of questions to ask, which I still don't know because I ask all the questions all the time in every situation. Um, and then I always have to be willing to flex and think about like, well, this person needs this person wants this person wants that, because it's about the comfort of the other people and not so much about what's happening with me, right? Um, so I say all of that to say that I know that I was difficult by all of those standards. I know it because I was hyper vigilant about everything all the time. But I think what I want again for us to think about is that hyper or hypo anything is a trauma response, right? And I wasn't being difficult. I wasn't trying to be difficult. The situation was definitely difficult, but I, Mia, was not difficult. Um, I was in active trauma. That's what I was. Like I was in an active trauma space. The day that G was born, I was told that he was gonna die. Like the day after, less than 12 hours, I was told he was gonna die. And my father, who is a man that I trusted more than any human, especially in that hospital, because I didn't know those people, right? He's also was a man with a lot of medical trauma that was attached to the institution that we were in. But my dad looked at me that day after they gave me this really horrific story about how he was going to die and it was going to be all bad. And he looked me in my eyes and he told me I had to get discharged from maternity because a dying little black boy is who they experiment on and they were going to kill my baby. So, yeah, I was scared and I was hyper vigilant and I was present and I was asking all the questions and I wrote everything down. I was hyper vigilant because my trauma was real, but difficult felt like an easier story or a cooler story to tell instead of dealing with the trauma that I was actually in. All right, and last but not least, I'm mentioning, I'll probably mention about 85 more times that G was in the NICU for 268 days. I was there every single day except for this like 10-day stretch, right? So I had gotten sick and I found myself having to get admitted to our adjoined adult hospital because I got strep and needed my tonsils taken out. So had to get a tonsillectomy, which I know I'm such a drama queen. It was so ridiculous that in the middle of his NICU stay, I had to go get my tonsils taken out. But after I got done with surgery and I was fully recovered, I came back to the unit all like, whole and healed. But this really interesting thing had happened in that 10-day stretch that I was gone. And the thing that happened was that I had become officially a bad mom. So these two things that I'm going to tell you are actually direct quotes from my son's medical record about me during this time period. The first one is patient having lots of D-stats today, mother absent. And the second one is patient had a good day following acute sickness, mother never here. Now, context, right? Full story. Before I had gotten sick, I was there, like I said, every single day. I never left the hospital at all. I had not gone home and slept in my bed for like 152 days up until this point. And if we're being honest, which I always try to be, I'd actually stopped being a good mom to my daughter. I was definitely absent, right, from her life. I was because I lived at the hospital with her brother. So this idea that for Gavin and to Gavin, I was non-existent or unavailable, absent or disengaged from his care felt like a stretch. And not to mention, his father, G's dad, was at that hospital every single day. He worked two jobs and so that I could stay at the hospital and our family would be good. But he came to that hospital every day after he got off from his second job and he stayed overnight until it was time for him to go back to work. He was there every single day, even when I was in the hospital. G was not abandoned. He was not by himself. He had not been neglected. He was loved. And because I had gotten sick, I was an absentee parent. So that's a little bit about language, right? Um, I want to talk a little bit about expectations before we go into some other things. Um, so these labels and expectations that happen in the NICU are tough, right? So being a good parent is a really loaded label to wear, especially in front of medical professionals, because this label, this good label, it feels really fickle because it's super like subjective and it's not really attached to anything realistic, especially for people who are in active trauma. Um, so if you wanted to be good, I felt like if I wanted to be good, I needed to be gracious, right? I needed to be pleasant all the time. Um, I needed to be invisible. And I say invisible because I couldn't show up as my full self because that might make people uncomfortable. So if I can't be fully me, then it feels like I'm invisible, right? So I needed to be invisible. I definitely needed to be accommodating, right? I needed to always extend grace and understand that like while other people might be able to make mistakes, the medical team might make mistakes. I could not. I needed to be perfect um, because I needed to be gracious, I needed to be kind, I needed to be happy, um, and I had to be present. And we already talked about present, but because I can't be too present, because then that's annoying, and that's a whole other thing, right? It's complicated. So by all of this, I know I was not a good parent because never mind trying to be my full self. On most days, I could not even access my best self, right? So good felt like out of the picture. I was spiraling most of the time because G was spiraling. G was medically unstable, which meant that I was emotionally dysregulated. And there was nothing good about that. There was nothing good about it. There was nothing good about me. There was nothing good about my life. Like nothing was good. And I just think that good is a very heavy, subjective, and it's kind of a mean expectation to have for people who are in active trauma, for people who are scared, for people who don't know where they are in space and time. Good feels like a hard ask. Now, this other label, right, the flip side of that, is what happens when parents and families don't meet this expectation of being good, right? The language and the power dynamics inside of the space, inside of the NICU, create this other label, this bad label, and that feels a little bit more fixed, right? It's not permanent, like it's not like a tattoo, but it feels like super glue level attached, right? So it feels a little bit more permanent because it follows you more than good. Good is like you're good until, and then you're bad and you're bad forever. Um, so when I was not gracious, right, then I was often labeled as obnoxious or disagreeable. Um, and since I was never agreeable because I had all the questions, I was often labeled as demanding or intimidating or even aggressive, which is a really hard label for a Black woman to have to wear. And I was never interested in juggling how much people wanted me around or didn't want me around because I was trying to be there for my child, right? I just wanted to be there for my baby. Um, so maybe I was overbearing, maybe I was difficult, but asking me to prioritize anything except for what I felt like I needed to be doing for my baby, just, I don't know. It feels like a hard thing, a difficult ask. But like honestly, the words that you see on this screen, on this part, these aren't just things that people say. And I think maybe it would be different if it was, right? If it was just conversations that were happening in the hall. But the hard thing is that these are the things that show up in our kids' medical charts, in their medical records. And these words are parts of the stories that most families cannot outrun. Like we can't get away from these labels. And this is the mark. So just wanted to think about that before we go into talking about barriers. So some barriers for me to human-centered communication. Um, the first one I want to talk about is intentionality. So I think that when we are not intentional or mindful, uh, communication breaks down. I mean, like almost immediately, right? Like before we can even start having a dialogue, we buried the lead. Being intentional with your words means that making sure that you say what you mean and you mean what you say, right? Which feels simple, but we don't do that a lot of the time. Um, so when you say that a 29 weeker, right, or a 30 weeker, 28 weeker, however old this baby is, when you say that they failed the extubation attempt, did they really fail it or do they just need more time to grow, right? Did the intervention just not work? Because those are two different things, right? One puts the onus on the patient, the other puts the onus on the medicine. Um, Intentionality is also being clear about your intentions in the space. Like, um, when you come to talk to me, is your intention to convince me or inform me? Because again, two very different things. One speaks to collaboration, the other speaks to for lack of better phrasing, like a dictatorship, right? One speaks to a very clear, like, this is what's happening. You don't have an opinion. You don't get to talk about it, right? So, do you want me to blindly follow your course of treatment, or do you want to help me understand what's going on? Understand what's going on with my child, this diagnosis. Tell me about the treatment plan that you're thinking about. Do you want to understand what scares me about everything that you've just said so that we can get to collaboration, right? So that I'm fully on board, you're fully on board, we can have a dialogue, and then trust is being built. So being intentional is really, really important. And our lack of intentionality is one of those barriers to like the communication piece. The second part is sympathy. And sympathy is this thing that we do when we attempt to walk in other people's shoes just to understand what they're going through, which I know for a lot of people sounds normal because that's the way that most of us are socialized. But the problem uh, with sympathy is that oftentimes unintentionally it minimizes. So, right. So, like you're trying to walk in my shoes to understand what's going on. And what ends up happening is that it minimizes my experience. It minimizes what I'm going through because now it's about you and your experience of what I'm going through, which is tough because we're not talking about you. We were originally talking about me, but now we're talking about you. So I'm not sure how many of you all have heard of Brene Brown, but she has this thing, the special on HBO, and she was talking about sympathy in it. And one of the things that she said, loosely quoting her, she says you can't walk in the shoes of someone who doesn't share your privilege around certain things. So like access to resources, education, race, class. But more important to me is that you cannot walk in the shoes of someone who doesn't share your privilege around power. And we all can recognize and say that power dynamics exist in the NICU, right? They exist in the NICU because they exist in medicine and in the world. So if you think about all of that, sympathy really feels kind of out of place and maybe in the way of effective communication. Because for me, when people would try to walk in my shoes, it often came off as like disrespectful, rude, and dishonest. And then, broken trust enters the chat because I can't rock with that, right? So an example is like when you come into the room, or people will come into my room and be like, Mia, I know how scared you are. I get it. Trust me. When, no offense, I get what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to be sympathetic to the situation, but you don't get it, right? If you've never watched your child code, if you've never had to see like people administering medicine and not talking to you, if you have never had to rely on absolute strangers to save the life of the person that you brought into the world when you're supposed to be their safe space, then you're completely helpless in that, like you don't get it. And I'm not mad at you for not getting it. I don't need you to get it. I don't want you to get it, if I'm being honest. But I do need you to stop saying that you get it because you don't. Um, or it's having somebody say to me or to you, I know how scary this is. I was terrified when my dog had to have surgery. Like, please get out of my shoes. Like, my shoes are full. I don't need anybody else in them. Like, we're all set on shoe filling over here. Empathy is actually the thing, right, that we want to practice. It's the gateway to human-centered, compassionate communication. And it goes in line with our next barrier that gets in the way, which is listening. Um, Empathy is listening to my experience in my shoes and just meeting me where I am. Judgment free zone, right? That's what empathy is. And that's why it is apart from sympathy, because it's not about you and how you feel about my experience. It is about me and my experience. Now, listening gets hard and gets complicated and becomes a barrier because there are these two parts for me to listening. The first part is hearing with humility, and then the second part is believing people. Um, so when I talk about hearing with humility for me is just recognizing that while we might be having a shared experience, right? Me as a family member, me as a mom, a parent, and you as a medical professional in the space, we are having a shared experience because we are both in this hospital and we are both caring for this child, right? And this child is my child, right? And you, my friends, you are at work. You are doing a job that you were trained to do, that you have been prepared for, that you chose, right? This was a choice for you. Um, And the person that you're taking care of, that baby, that tiny human, that's my child. We are not the same. Therefore, our experiences are not the same. And that's not to say that you don't care about your patients, because not only do I have to believe that you do, because if I didn't believe that, I would like drive myself, um, I would just go into dark places. But I know that you do. Again, I've worked inside a space. I see how the people that work in those spaces care about those patients. And your patient again is my child, right? And while you are at work in the place that you chose, I am in hell. And it is a special kind of hell where they have like run out of water, and I am surrounded by bears, and the bears have knives, and I'm swimming and I'm drowning, mostly just drowning, because again, this is my child. So when I say that I'm scared, I just need you to hear that I'm scared. Hear that I don't understand the thing that you've explained 100 times. Hear that I'm angry, and just create space where it's okay for me to be angry. I don't need the judgment. I just need to be heard, right? So the second part of listening, which I think is the hardest part of listening, um, is believing families, right? So believing them when they tell you they're believing them when they tell you their experience of you, of life, of the unit. Believing them when they say that this moment in our shoes, in their shoes, is really hard, even when it doesn't look that way. Even when you can say to yourself, well, I know if it was me, I would, X, Y, and Z. That's fine, but I'm telling you that this is hard. So just believe me when I say that it's hard. It's about believing me even when my experience doesn't reconcile or align with your own life experiences or your experience of your colleague, your experience of the place and space that you work in, or super hard part, your experience of yourself, right? Who you believe yourself to be. Um, Believing families is oftentimes the reason that medical professionals get called to task for not listening. Because here's what happens, right? So you'll ask me, like, Mia, what's going on? What's happening? How are you doing? Right? How are things going? And then I tell you that I feel ignored or dismissed. I tell you that this thing happened and I'm hurt behind it, or my heart is broken about this, or you've broken my trust. Or better yet, I'll tell you about this macro or microaggression that I've experienced and how I feel dehumanized, right? You asked me a question, excuse me. You ask me, I tell you, I answer, but because that's not your experience, right? Because you would never behave that way. Because your coworker would not do those kinds of things. Because your unit is perfect and your staff doesn't act that way. You've asked me, I answered you, and you still don't believe me because too much of who you are and what you've invested your time and your space and your energy and your resources in, it feels threatened if I'm telling the truth about my experience. And again, that's not about me, that's about you, right? Human centered communication that's all about you doesn't feel right. True listening means believing families when they say and tell you their experiences in their shoes, period. Last but not least, before we get into some storytelling stuff, is storytelling, right? So in the NICU, this thing happens where we just start telling stories, and we tell a lot of stories about people without people. And we tell them in the halls and in the charts and in handoff and workrooms during rounds. We tell them right outside folks' doors, like the doors are soundproof and they can't hear us. Stories get told all over the place. And that has a lot of potential to be hurtful and damaging and dangerous because the stories that are being told are singular. So the quote that's up on the screen is from a TED Talk by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie called The Danger of a Single Story. And I just want you all to think about this idea that there are no three sides to stories when they're told about families, right? There are barely two. Really, there's just the one. And it's yours. It's the side of those of those that are in power. There is this Nigerian, so the author of that TED Talk is Nigerian, as a Nigerian woman. So that she talks about this Nigerian principle, this Igbo principle called Nkale, and it's all about power. And she talks about how stories are defined by power, how they are told, who gets to tell them, when they get told, whose story is being told, how many stories get told, all the things are all about power. Stories in the NICU are told from your perspective through your lens, and they're carried by your power, right? Your power, the power of the people in that place, told my story for such a long time, and it's still telling the stories of families every single day. And there is a lot of harm in that because it's told again about us without us. So think about these two pieces before we get into a little bit more about stories. Power, right, in relation to storytelling. Power is the ability to control the narrative in medical charts, what goes in them, and how that information can follow people throughout their lifespan, not just in medical spaces, but in education spaces, in judicial spaces, in their employment spaces. Having the ability to control that narrative, knowing that your words, the way that you choose them, how you decide to put them together can influence how other professionals choose to see me, choose to see my family, choose to see my child, and it impacts the way that they behave. That's power. Power is even in that shift change dynamic, right? And how will you shape that next person's perception of me? Will the language that you use, the story that you tell about me, will it be something that, again, empowers me? Or is it going to be something that I can't escape? You know, the great philosopher Spider-Man said that, like, with great power comes great responsibility. So I just want you to think about power in relation to storytelling, and I just want to unpack storytelling a little bit more. So again, during this TED Talk, Shimamanda talks about these three aspects of storytelling, but I'm going to really talk about the one, and that's stereotypes. During her talk, when she spoke about stereotypes, she said, quote, uh, all of these stories make me who I am, but to insist on only the negative stories flattens my experience and overlooks the many other stories that formed me. The single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they're not true, but it's that they're incomplete. And they make one story become the only story. So let's think about and talk about stereotypes really, not really quickly, because nothing I do is really quickly, but we're going to do it. So during, again, my employee stint inside the hospital setting, I was on rounds one day with the team, and this nurse was giving her report out on her patients. So the first baby, 34-weeker, who had been working on feeding, had done really great overnight, made some great progress during the day, the day before. So she reports out how this baby, how he had excelled and he was exceptional and thriving, right? So that was kind of like the gist of her report out for that baby. The second baby, also 34 weeks, also working on feeding, also had done amazing, right? But her report out for this baby was that he aggressively attacked the bottle, that he was fighting with the nurses to eat, and that it was frightening how forceful he was. And that is all direct language from the chart. Now, the only difference between these babies, these NICU babies, is that one was black and one was white. So if you can just imagine which narrative got attached to which baby, right? So again, think about like I said, like these stories follow you throughout all your journeys. So like, what if this kid has an outburst, right? 5 years old, 16 years old, whatever, and somebody's able to point back, well, according to his doctors, he's always been aggressive or difficult or even angry as a baby. He's been this way his whole life. I'm sure that most of you all have heard this idea about angry Black women or enraged, terrifying, dangerous Black men, right? Like this stereotype, this idea is not new. And it also, to Shimamanda's point, is not wrong, right? Black men, Black women, Black non-binary people, Black people, whatever that looks like, yeah, are angry. They are enraged. They are terrifying, dangerous, beautiful, happy, funny, elated, joyful, sad, confused, innocent, all the things, right? Like we are all the feelings, all the emotions, all the descriptors because we are human people, right? We, like everybody else, get to feel, be, and do all the things. The problem is this idea that we are more angry, more enraged, more terrifying, more dangerous than insert, right? Because that's based on what? It's when biases inform the language that creates the stereotype that tells the story that goes into my child's chart or is told in handoff. I think that's where the disconnect from the oath, right? That first do no harm, or however that oath shows up in your medical space, it's that disconnect that makes that single story dangerous. The second part before we move into like some how do we fix this? How do we help? One of the scariest things that thinking about stereotypes or this idea is one of the things that I would hear a lot, or I heard a lot, and it was really scary to me, which is saying a lot because I dealt with a lot of scary things. Was this idea of strong Black babies versus wimpy white boys. So again, we're gonna harken back to a time where he was not Tom Brady this day, but he was having a moment, right? He was having a moment, and his nurse never really came in the room to check on him. But I would watch her jump up every time a bell went off in the room across the hall. Now, I don't have the full context of what was going on with that baby, but I do know what was going on with mine. And when G's doctor finally came in, not finally, but when he came in to talk to me about G's blood gas and the labs that they had drawn and all these things, I mentioned that like his stats were going all over the place and they were very unstable, and that like nobody's really coming to check on him. And so he kind of looks up and looks around and he sees the nurse across the hall, and he looks back at me and he goes, "Oh, well, his nurse is really busy with her wimpy white boy." And then he like kind of giggled. And I'm like, "Say what now? Like, what's happening in this moment?" So the attending, this doctor goes on to talk to me about this NICU hierarchy, right? And how there's this hierarchy of outcomes, and our Black babies do extremely well. And then he says, like, the ladder goes, uh, strong Black girls. And then he winks at me, and I'm like, I don't understand what's happening, but okay. And then he goes, so it's strong Black girls, like, and then it's the strong Black boys, and then he does like the over to Gavin, and I'm like, hey, please get me out of here. Like, I want out of the chat. And then he goes, then there's white girls, and then at the very bottom are these wimpy white boys. You see? And she's taking care of a wimpy white boy. So, you know. And he just like stepped back and he was so proud of his explanation, like, you get it now. So everything's fine. And so for me, my 24-week, 1 pound, 8 ounce child is so strong that he doesn't deserve or require intervention, but these poor, wimpy white boys do. And so, because I am my father's child, always, I just asked him, so if there was one vial of medicine, right, and you had to choose between my strong Black son and this wimpy white boy, would you make the choice to give it to the wimpy white boy because of his wimpy status, or is there like some sort of medical something that goes into that decision? Because I'm just feeling confused, because if G's so strong and his Blackness creates this like strength, this like, hyper strength that other babies don't have, why is he still here 5 months in fighting for his life? Because he was still fighting for his life. So all of that to say that, I don't know. Maybe white boys are wimpy. I'm not sure the science behind this thesis. It doesn't sound right to me, but I don't know everything, so I concede to the medical professionals in that space. So maybe wimpy white boys is the truth. And Black babies have the highest morbidity and mortality in this country. So wimpy white boy can't be the entire story. This idea and this trope that Black babies, Black people, Black what are just stronger than other babies, right? Black babies are stronger than other babies, but our babies are often born smaller, sicker, and die more often. That trope is dehumanizing. And it's rooted in outdated and racist ideas that put babies and families in danger, right? So that's a danger of that single story. And again, first do no harm is the oath. And so how do we connect and get back to that? All right. So let's turn the proverbial page and talk about how we get to hope. We've talked about some of the things that are getting in the way, and let's talk about how we can finally get there. Think about this quote for a second, that in our darkest moments, and as NICU parents, I would offer that we have plenty of them, we are relying on complete strangers, depending on these strangers to be motivated by our pain, our sadness, our suffering, and feel motivated to like act to relieve it. But the question is, how do we get there? And for me, I think it's these three things. This is what I think. So here's the thing: see, hear, and save. Right? For me, the simplest step was and always will be compassion. Compassion literally means to suffer together. It is this feeling that arises when you're confronted with another person's suffering and you just feel motivated to do something just to relieve it. Even if it's just for a moment, you just feel motivated to do it. before anything else happens, you have to see me. You have to see me as worthy of your knowledge, your time, your energy, worthy of your medicine, worthy of saving. Compassion doesn't have room for biases. It doesn't care about my race or my ethnicity, if I'm poor, what language I speak, where I came from in the world. Doesn't care who I love. Like, that's not compassion's business. Compassion doesn't have time for that. Compassion sees families, sees us as fully human and worthy without needing to know our backstory, without needing justification for that worth, right? Compassion just does. So a lot of times when I was working in the hospital, I would get asked like, well, what can the nurses say to families, or how can we let people know that we have compassion for what they're going through? What do we need to say? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, because for me, you can't script compassion. You can't script it. You either have a heart for people or you don't. You either have the ability to see people irrespective of your biases, right? Because we all have them. I have biases. Everybody has biases. That's just a part of the human experience, right? But you have to have the ability to see people, regardless of those biases, as worthy of saving. Because there's no script for compassion. There are no three words that I can give you to say like these three magic words. People are gonna be like, oh, that's a compassionate person right there. You just have to be willing to see people as human and therefore worthy, with no asterisks required. Also, a great quote by Prince. Love that for us. Next up is empathy, right? So see, hear, save. We talked about empathy a little bit in relation to listening earlier. And empathy requires a decentering of self. And that can often be hard for healthcare professionals. And I know that because before I was Gavin's mom, before I did these things, I was a healthcare professional. I grew up in medicine. So I know the education that we receive. Um, I know how perfectionism is baked into the education that informs the way that we practice our respective crafts, because there are lives on the line, right? I know how perfectionism and that idea can create certain complexes or thoughts in your head that can color the way that you see yourself and others. Perfectionism lacks empathy, which makes you the judge, the jury, and executioner, no pun intended, uh, which doesn't leave a lot of room for like listening to or hearing other people's perspectives. So you think about this, right? When there's a difficult conversation that needs to happen and the family doesn't agree or go along with what you have come up with, right? Your plan, and they're asking too many questions, right? What is your initial response? Because when I would talk to clinicians, they would say things like, "Is this family questioning my expertise? Like, how could they not trust me? How could they not trust us? Like, I am insert the title, right? Insert whatever title you have." The other thing that I would want you to think about is like your intention versus the impact. And even if you come into a space with all the good intentions, right? All the greatest intentions, the words you say or don't say, the things you do or don't do will always have a greater impact, right? So when there is a harm that is caused, how often do we focus on the harm and not the intention of the person that did the thing? When families get upset, how often is the conversation centered around you explaining your intentions to justify your actions? So, what I'm asking you to consider are these two things. If I'm asking a question, decentering yourself, right? Being empathetic in that moment is listening and hearing me, trying to understand that I'm not questioning your ability or your expertise in the space. I'm not questioning you because I'm not thinking about you. This isn't about you. I'm trying to be a good parent. I'm trying to be knowledgeable. I just want access to the information that's going to help keep my child alive. That's going to help me do the thing that you're doing, because you're taking care of my child in a way that I can't, the way that I wasn't trained to. a way that I wasn't prepared to have to, right? Because the truth is that once this chapter is closed, I'm going to have to be all the things to this kid, and I'm scared. I am scared of that. So I'm asking you because I want to be armed with the knowledge to save my child's life if that's what it comes down to. I want to be able to do the thing that you're doing here at home. And so, again, me asking you questions isn't about you, it's about me trying to be a good parent to my child. And then the second thing, and I'm gonna hold your hand when I say this, holding your hand. Um, the second thing is that your intentions are not and cannot be the most important thing in a room. Period. Because if your intentions are the most important thing, then you haven't heard anything that's happened, anything that I said. One of the things that my grandmother, who obviously I was her favorite, I think you can understand why. My grandmother would tell me all the time that the road to hell was paved with good intentions. And she would say, like, baby, it don't matter what you meant to do because we got to talk about what you did and how we make amends. Nobody cares about what your intentions were when they're hurt, right? No one cares about what your intentions are, especially when your intentions are out of alignment with your words and your actions. The impact is always going to win. Impact for the W, right? So when you are married to your intentions and you refuse to acknowledge the weight of the impact of your actions, your words, your behaviors, again, that's about you. And in those moments, I know that I am not seen or heard in that space. There's no empathy there for me because you don't hear me. You're not even thinking about me. Last up is my favorite. So it's not my favorite. It's last up. So see, hear, save. Compassion and empathy don't work without this last piece, accountability and acknowledgement. So when things don't go right, again, what is it that you do? When a treatment course is wrong or when a conversation doesn't go well, what is the fix? Oftentimes, I can tell you it's not an apology because apologies are hard. And they're not hard because they're impossible. They're hard because how does this apology make me look? Defense is often the position because we have to protect our status. You got to protect your status, your profession, this thing that you've worked so hard for. And if we're going to be completely honest, which again, I try to be, perfect people don't apologize. It's that perfectionism thing again, right? Perfect people don't apologize. But the problem is that if you don't see me, you don't see my humanity, you don't see me as worthy, then you won't hear me. You won't hear that I'm scared. You won't hear the innocence of my questions. You'll label me as aggressive or angry, or maybe you'll just dismiss me altogether. So if you don't see me, then you won't hear me. And if you can't hear me, then you can't save me. And I'll never trust you to deliver. Perfect people don't apologize, but here's the great part of this. To quote John Legend, we're just ordinary people, all of us, regardless of what you do for a living. You're just a regular person. And there's imperfection in that. There's humanity in there. There's a human element in that. Infusing humanity into our interactions, our communications, or even the medicine, it starts with an acknowledgement of your own. You have to see yourself as human and therefore imperfect and capable of mistakes. That accountability, that acknowledgement of that is the key to like unlocking compassion and empathy. And that's the thing that leads us to hope. Hope for me is like this feeling of expectation or a desire for a thing to happen, right? It's where trust gets to enter the chat. It's a want for something to be the case or to be story again. So on April 12th, 2009, after a miscarriage and a stillbirth, I met somebody who would change our family forever, right? He was just 1 pound, 8 ounces. And these stories that were told to me about my baby about G for many, 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 many moons were like the worst stories that had ever been written or told in the world. And not because they were hard to hear, because I can do hard things. I'm not incapable of doing hard things. And it wasn't even because they were sad, because I know how to withstand sad things. Like I can do hard things, and I can withstand sad things. They were the worst stories because not only were they devoid of hope, but oftentimes they dehumanized him. They dehumanized me, and they dehumanized my family. All I heard from the day after he was born is how he would die, how sick he was, how he continuously failed, how he didn't meet the mark. I was labeled delusional. I was absent. I was a bad mom whose unwillingness to listen would cost the patient his life. That is a direct quote from Gavin's chart. And that's one heck of a story, right? His dad was invisible. And that, again, one heck of a story. But the story lacks accountability for all the miscommunications, for the misdiagnoses, for the micro and macro aggressions that we endured, for the failed treatments, for the broken trust. Accountability is so, so, so important, because without it, you will never unbreak the broken trust. So what do I mean by that? There's this amazing trauma surgeon named Dr. Punch that works at the Brick Clinic here in St. Louis. And he says this thing about broken trust, and this idea that he has, I'm going to share with you all. So he says that when a bone is broken, an orthopedic surgeon does not heal the bone. They simply unbreak it and surround it as best they can with the conditions that promote healing. So in that, he says the only way to unbreak trust is to surround and support a person so that they have the capacity to heal, assuring that their trust is not further broken in the process. A broken bone. So for me, right, what I hear and what I take away from that is like a broken bone will not heal if it's ignored, and neither will I. The break has to be acknowledged, and it has to be treated. If something goes wrong, as families, we just want to know that someone is sorry, that somebody cares. We want an acknowledgement of the break, preferably by the person responsible for the break, but an acknowledgement nonetheless, right? In addition, we need to know that there is a plan to correct what was broken, i.e., the trust, and that you are working on cultivating the conditions that will promote healing, because I need for you to be able to give me hope. I have to trust that you can do that. And I can't do that if we're working in broken trust, right? Hope is not about lying. I don't need you to lie to me. I don't need you to withhold information or deceive me. Hope is about quelling fears, right? It's about mitigating stress where you can. It's about because without compassion, empathy, listening, intentionality, and accountability, hope is outside of our grasp. And families deserve more than medicine or healthcare that is devoid of hope and humanity, right? Because again, if you cannot see me, then you won't hear me. And if you don't hear me, then you cannot save me. So before I get out of here, I just want to share one more thing with you all. From the day that I found out that I was pregnant, I had this, first of all, this is my daughter, my beautiful daughter, and that is G. But from the day that I found out that I was pregnant, I had a lot of hopes and dreams for that guy, for G. Regardless of all the things that had happened before him, I really did dare to dream dreams for him, which might feel silly, but I did do that. And then overnight, the day that that perfect little peanut was born, he had a massive stroke that resulted in a grade 4 IVH. And again, the language, right? The things that were said to me about him destroyed the dreams that I had for him and did not offer me hope. It sparked fear and it created tension. It led to mistrust. And there's a lot of things that I think about even 16 years later, right? Because I know that the fellow that delivered that news to me, he did not have bad intentions, right? I don't believe that he had any bad intentions or wished any ill or harm on me and my family. But it doesn't mean that that was not the impact of what happened. And I often wonder if our foundation, if we could have started differently, if my father would have felt safer or felt better, if we could have had a different conversation in the beginning. If maybe he would have said to me, like, Mia, we have to have a really hard conversation. And some of the things that we say might be hard to hear, but we really do want to be honest with you and give you space to think about all of these things and make the best decision. You and your family make the best decision. And then, said all the things that he said, all the doom and gloom and scary things that he thought, maybe without some of the certainly he's gonna die pieces, but in saying all of that, then even circling back to say, whatever decision you all make, like, we are here and we'll do everything in our power to get you to the outcome that works best for you and your family, right? Everything there is still factual. He didn't lie to me or anything, but that conversation in that way would not have led us to believe that they wanted to kill my son just because they didn't have any hope for him anyway, right? They didn't hear us. They didn't see how scared we were. So they didn't even humanize us and our feelings and our emotions in that moment. I wonder if we could have started off differently and I could have trusted them with the task of saving the most important person in that part of my life. It's all about language. It's all about the words that we choose that lead to this effective communication. And it can deliver hope to families or it can malign them, right? Or it can dehumanize them. And that's our choice. We get to make different choices. We get to see people, we get to hear people, and we get to save people. We get to live up to this oath that we have that I think everyone should have, and that's to first do no harm. I want to thank you all again for taking the time to do this today, and I really do hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mia. We sincerely appreciate your insightful and impactful presentation. This webinar emphasized how intentional, compassionate communication in the NICU can foster trust, hope, and healing for families navigating some of their most vulnerable moments. We hope that those of you watching found some valuable information to use in your roles in the NICU. Thank you to Chiesi USA, whose partnership makes this microlearning series possible. Chiesi is a global biopharmaceutical company committed to developing and commercializing innovative therapeutic solutions in respiratory health, rare diseases, and specialty care. The company's mission is to improve people's quality of life and act responsibly toward both the community and the environment. Once again, this presentation is worth one continuing education credit for NICU nurses. Click the link on your screen at the end of this video to claim your continuing education credits. Thank you again for your time, and we hope to see you in our third and final installment of this microlearning video series for NICU professionals, in which we'll talk about trauma-informed care in the NICU. Thank you, everyone.